All right, it's 6 p.m. We will call the meeting to order. Clerk, may I have a roll call and an establishment of a quorum?
Cindy Byton.
Here.
Mary Beth Shaw. Here. Barb Stotts.
Here.
Mike Wagner.
Present.
Matt Curl.
Here.
Dylan Halmenstein.
Here.
And I'm here as well.
I approve the posting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on that? Hearing done. Cindy? Yes. Mary Beth?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yep.
Angie?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. And I don't believe there are any public input tonight, so we'll move right along to minutes and payroll. And 3.1, do I have an approval of the Board of Education meeting minutes of November 13th, 2023?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on this? Hearing done. Cindy? Yes. Mary Beth? Yes. Mike?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Our first item under district business tonight is our library plan. It's due every 3 years. We evaluate and take action on. Who will be, any added?
I'll just comment, Mary Jane put it together, I proofread a couple of times with her. I don't know if Liz, you got a chance to look at it as well. But it's a working document. So this is our guidelines that we follow, put it together every 3 years, but we adjust it annually. And we adjust it as we go along and as needed.
Any questions?
I learned a new word, I was telling Cindy. Yeah. And I'm probably gonna mispronounce it, and I probably can't remember what it means. Realia.
Oh,
Anybody knows?
realia is typically cultural artifacts or manipulatives that relate to like culture. And so the best example I can give is when you teach a world language, often you will have authentic pieces of their culture within your classroom room, and it's called realia because it's an authentic representation or a symbol of that culture.
Very cool to know.
And the other thing I was gonna mention, I.
Reality.
Yes, but it's realia.
So it sounds like she's attending a lot of meetings and stuff with teachers. I'm hoping, and I imagine this is already happening, is that they're coordinating projects with the library media center and everything. So, you know, asking her for resources and stuff, that would be ideal.
Do you know how often they?
Yeah, and she's part of the CISA 2 group as well.
Yeah.
So she stays in touch with all things library media spec, you know, that's going on in the state. State's current, those things, so, yeah.
Great to see collaboration with the other libraries. I'm sure that we have to in some level, but it's just throughout the whole thing, so great to see.
Any other discussion? All right, do I have a motion to approve the district library?
So moved. Second.
Question. I'm done. Cindy? Yes. Mary Beth?
Yeah.
Mike?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yep.
Angie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. 5.1, do I have a motion to approve the open enrollment in students for 2023-2024 school year?
So moved. Second.
Any questions on that? It's like students that attended here that recently moved out of district. I'd like to continue. Yes. All right, hearing done. Cindy? Yes. Mary Beth? Yes. Mike?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. All right, under personnel, do I have a motion to combine 6.1 through 6.4?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Any questions on that? I was just wondering, did we post for any of those vacancies?
For the basketball ones, no. Sammy Bollig had mentioned at one point in conversation that she was interested in doing more here, and so when that one came up, I said, you know, is basketball something that you enjoy? And she said yes, so having a she's an EA for us already, so having her, and works with middle school, so having her add on to that made sense. And had really great feedback from parents and community members who know her that was really excited that she has this opportunity. And then Tyler Fuchs, our head girls basketball coach, I talked with him just to see who's out there, who's already starting to be a part of our program that we can bring on full time. And so Carissa is one of those people. And so again, just getting to have the opportunity to publicly recognize their contributions and get them in that permanent role. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Do you have any ideas on how to prevent coaches from resigning this late in the game when it comes this?
She
close to
did
the
not,
season?
so Kelly didn't resign this late in the game, she resigned earlier, but wanted to respect fall sports and not cause a disruption there. So her and I had a conversation, Tyler knew about it a long time ago, but wanted, and then had some conversations with people to line up Carissa. And then we wanted to wait, like I said, for fall sports to get done, and then Kelly wanted to have conversations with the girls first, so that way he can answer their questions that they had, so that way it's a smooth transition. So, yeah, this has been in the works for a while, but wanted fall sports to have their time in the transition to the holidays.
Anything else? All right, then hearing none. Cindy?
Yes.
Mary Beth?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Dylan?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
I'll vote yes as well. All right, on to district business finance. We have a little discussion and update on our final retainage due to PSI in relation to some of those punch list items and final projects.
We received a bill, a very large bill at the end of the summer in August, this goes back. And of course, Derek was new, Greg was new, I'm new. I talked with Rachel and she wasn't expecting this either, felt uncomfortable with it, so here it still sits. I did my research, obviously. I thought at first this was, there's always a punch list. Dale and I are working with Bill. Our issues right now are limited to some outside door and some flooring issues that you've been aware of, and the replacement, called them tiles, but the carpet squares are on back order right now. That aside, I didn't know what this was, and I spent a lot of time with performance on it. This is retainage, and I didn't understand what retainage was, and I'm somewhat familiar with the industry. When we pay our bills over the course of 2 years, what was the building? As per state law, we as a district retain some of the funds. So, for example, this is just an example, if a monthly payment or a payment was made or submitted, it was $100,000, maybe we retain $15,000 because we want to make sure the project actually was completed. And again, this is state law in the state of Wisconsin. Every district has to do this. And I did contact some other firms of people I know to say, I don't understand this. And after explaining, they said, well, Craig, yeah, everybody does that. It's in your contract, and lo and behold, it is in the contract. And it's a sum that's negotiated at the time of the contract. And therefore, this has already been approved. There was one change order, and this goes back into COVID. I believe it probably happened right after you approved the funds from the referendum, and prices skyrocketed, and nobody expected that, and there was a change order at the sum of close to $600,000. That is different from the retainage, but at the end of the day, this is a completed list, and we owe them, as of 3 months ago, $583, and I actually,
$1,000.
$583,000. I talked with Scott, who I believe he's the CEO, if not the owner of Performance, last week, and I confirmed that I would pay this, though it's been approved by you. I wanted you to know that we are paying this bill.
And, part of this too is the nuance of construction contracting at its finest, in that there are some things, small print, yes, about the retainage, but not enough small print in the scope of the picture to prove that we initially wanted a unfinished concrete wall, and then upon finishing it differently, somehow change it, you know, there isn't that kind of line item and fine print anywhere to
Spent a
adjust
month
or-
or
yeah,
two arguing,
we've
why are
tried.
we paying, where does it say this is what that wall is gonna look like? Why are we paying for $19,000 worth of tile? And the comeback was, we are not paying for it, Greg. It's already been paid for, you're just paying the retainage fee. That's the money that we withheld throughout the entire project. And it took me this long to wrap my head around it, and quite frankly, some people that I know. And
Part of the
trust,
game.
it's, Craig, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
It's at the end of a project, there's always a like, are you kidding me? Well, we're surprised.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, I don't know if, Derek, you weren't in all, if you had a chance to talk to Rachel. She wanted to talk to you about this before that check was actually cut out. Any questions?
So when it comes to the budget, this was budgeted for and technically paid for.
This was intended to come out of fund balance, I believe, or
Fund 46.
Fund 46. Fund 46. So the funds are there as planned.
And previous, I think, to you coming on board, is when we had the meeting about the overage and the adjusted
Yeah.
Inflation for some of the things. So we were aware of the overage initially.
That, I think that may have started work possibly before construction even started. When was this, a spring referendum?
It's vague.
Yeah,
yes,
it's kind of fuzzy up there, but yeah.
So this,
It was a meeting at Black Earth Elementary where Scott came out to meet with us to talk about that,
but, right,
Yeah.
which
right.
would have been after construction was
I
started.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, but
So
I
it
think
was
the minimal.
summer.
It was a little
Yeah.
after, yeah.
But still, we knew about it, we knew it was coming out, but this is where it got. Yeah. It is, but
It-
yes, it was budgeted for, it's
It's not something.
It doesn't
it's not a
change
surprise,
anything.
it
There's-
doesn't change, right.
it was a surprise to us because we
Correct.
weren't expecting this, and then it's like, okay, we learn about it. And then I just thought, this is a big check to write, went back in, it was all approved. Just wanted to let you know that we're gonna move ahead now.
And because Jordan was acting as project manager, some of those contractual language things and
Little-
communications, little things that you may have missed now. because-
Are in the closet
Right,
somewhere,
yeah.
right there,
So,
yes.
we tried our best, but we have to pay the retainage.
Well, the school's there.
The school's
Yeah.
And the school's there,
We
right?
have finished grades
Yeah.
and new flooring, so, yeah, there you go. Any other questions on that? All right, then we will move along to our finance workshop with our finance gurus and professionals, Derek and Greg.
I'm gonna turn this over to Greg. We have a guest from Baird that is now gonna get off mute, and they're gonna go through a presentation, and then we'll, I'm gonna scooch over here during that, and then we'll come back and continue to discuss.
So we have three little subtopics we'd like to talk about tonight. The first being we have Mary Blaha here from Robert W. Baird. She's a school finance specialist, and she's going to talk about the referendum and the impact and how that all works. And if you have questions, surely at the end, Mary will be able to address some of those questions. Once we're completed with that, Derek will give you an update on the forecast model, which we worked on since we last talked a little bit and fine-tuned that. Again, that's always a work in progress. You always seem to find something that you want to do a little bit different. And Mary can, actually, Derek attended a workshop, and I was scheduled to go on Thursday that Robert Baird puts on. We get the forecast model from Robert W. Baird. So if you had questions regarding the model and how we do things, again, Mary would be able to address some of those. Then once we're done with that, we'll go over kind of the steps that we need to complete here in the near term to get that referendum up and rolling. We've worked with Quarles and Brady as our bond counsel for the referendum. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, and she has a presentation for us tonight, and then we'll go from there. Somebody's muted.
Oh, I heard.
I can hear you, Mary.
Okay. Right. So let me just pick that up. I gotta share my screen. Pick the screen that I need to share. And let's see, you don't want to see my blank screen, so let me move my screens over here. I am sorry about that. Those things where you don't pick the right screen right away.
No problem.
I probably have 3 different screens that I'm looking at. All right. Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. Again, I am Mary Blaha. I am part of the School Business Solutions team, and I'm sure that you have met Jordan. He is part of our banking team, so he helps with a lot of, when you're doing like capital referendums and different things like that. Jordan is your person there. And the School Business Solutions team, we support the budget forecast model and school analytics and some other things. So yeah, right now we are in the middle of doing our budget forecast model workshops. So Derek spent the afternoon with us going through the budget forecast model just recently. So today I just put together a brief presentation to go over a few different things. We'll talk about School Finance 101 and the reason why that's important. And then we'll talk about some referendum basics, and we're just going to kind of keep building. We'll talk about some operational referenda history and trends. And then once we have that big picture, then we're going to look at Wisconsin Heights and surrounding district data. And if you have any questions, go ahead and just, if you want me to clarify something or anything like that, go ahead and just go ahead and ask. I'm good with that. So a little bit of School Finance 101, and you're probably thinking, why do we have to have, all of this? Well, we're going to start out with talking about the revenue limit. And the revenue limit is one of the largest factors in determining how much revenue a district can generate for operations each year. So it's something that is put in place by the state, and it was put in place in 1993-94. And there's a formula that the revenue limit is calculated on. And for Wisconsin Heights, when we look at the revenue limit formula per pupil categorical aid, that's almost 80% of your school district's general fund operating revenue. So that's a lot. That's a big portion of your general fund operating. And so for most districts, that is between 75 and 95%. So you're right smack in there, right along with all of the other districts. But because that is such a big portion of the revenue, that's why we really focus on that quite a bit. So the revenue limit is calculated by looking at your resident membership FTE, and that is looking at the number of students, full-time equivalent, of students who live within your district and attend a public school. So they may be open enrolling out, but that's the number that you look at. And so when we start talking about doing any sort of budget forecasting, we ask what's happening with your membership. Because if your membership is increasing or decreasing, as you can see in this formula, you take that membership FTE times a dollar amount per pupil. And so for, in this biennial budget, the dollar amount per pupil was increased by $325 per pupil, which is so that increased the amount of revenue that your district can raise. But if you are looking and making future projections, if you're looking at your membership, if your membership is going down, even though there's that $325 per pupil increase, you may be seeing that amount, obviously, because it's a smaller number for FTE, that amount is a little bit less. But in addition to that, then the formula includes some one-time, non-recurring exemptions. And so that's where, when we get further down the line tonight, we're going to talk about non-recurring referenda, which is something that Wisconsin Heights currently has. That falls into that box, the one-time, non-recurring exemptions. And then there can also be some ongoing recurring exemptions. And for, if we're looking at a recurring operational referendum, that would be in that box. So when you take that membership FTE times that per pupil amount, plus any recurring or non-recurring exemptions, you get your total revenue limit authority. So that is kind of the baseline when we are thinking about what is happening with our revenues, and then we're going to think about how that's going to impact our tax levy and mill rate. But it also, when you're looking at what is happening with your revenue limit authority, if you want to have a balanced budget, and if there's a deficit that you're seeing, which is something that Wisconsin Heights has seen in the past, that's when then you're looking, okay, what can we do to change our revenue limit authority? And you may be looking then, obviously, at either doing a non-recurring or a recurring exemption. And when we think about those, if you happen to have declining enrollment, for our projections for tonight, I think we have stable membership. But you know that even if you have a decrease in size in your membership, it's not necessarily that it's all in second grade. It can be spread across all of those grades. So again, it might not mean that you could just have savings because you have less students. There might not be a corresponding savings. So we have our revenue limit, and then the other important topic that we like to think about is equalization aid. And the revenue limit is calculating that revenue limit authority that we have. And then what happens is that is saying that is the amount of revenue that you can use through your combination of your local property tax levy generally and your general state aid. So the more general state aid that the district receives, then the lower the local property tax levy is. However, if the equalization aid formula is also is calculated off of another formula. And that's looking at, again, your membership FTE, and it is also looking at your property value. So this is where you take into consideration the property value and what is happening with equalized valuations in your school district, and how does that compare to the rest of the state. So what happens is that there's a calculation to say what value per member does Wisconsin Heights have, and how does that compare to the rest of the state. So if you think about, if you have property values that are increasing, and even if your membership stays the same, it appears that there's more property value per member. And what happens in the equalization aid formula is that a more wealthy district, or a district that has more property value per member, then they will receive generally less state aid. And conversely, if there's a district that has less property value per member, they receive more state aid. So in Wisconsin Heights experience, equalized valuations have been increasing, and as a result, it appears that in that equalized aid calculation that there's more property value per member, which then is lowering potentially, or at least not allowing the amount of state aid to increase. Do we have any questions so far?
I think we're good.
Okay. It's probably not a very exciting topic, but there's a reason why we're talking about all of this a little bit. So
Mary,
when you
Derek
think about,
and I can hardly sit still.
Go ahead.
Derek and I can hardly sit still through this thing.
They're chomping at the bit to add their,
Oh, yeah, well, see, See, that's the thing, when you get us business people together, we could just like sit around and talk about, like, and look at different charts and graphs the whole night, so.
And that's why we're quiet. We're just taking lots of notes and being very quiet.
So when you think about, so you had your revenue limit authority and all of the different things, the factors that went into that. So when you got your revenue limit authority, then that's saying that's the combination of how much the district can raise for the revenue limit portion of the tax levy through a combination of state aid and the local property tax levy. So that is kind of that purplish box that you see. It says revenue limit tax levy. So that's for the general fund, Fund 10, and then for any non-referendum debt, Fund 38, and then for Fund 41. So that is all part of that revenue limit tax levy. That's the one that has that revenue limit authority. But in your total school levy, there are some other pieces that go into play. So you also have some referendum approved debt. That's Fund 39 if you have that. And if you have community service, that's part of Fund 80. So those all get added together. And then occasionally, a district will have some prior year levy chargeback or other chargebacks that get added in. So those 4 pieces all get added together to get to your total school levy. And the reason why that is important is that there could be other factors that are impacting that total school levy. And then once you have that total school levy, then we go back and we look at that equalized property valuation, and we divide that total school levy by equalized property valuation. So for Wisconsin Heights, for this school year, the total school levy, so it's the whole big circle, is $10,791,053. And then when you divide that by the equalized property value, and take that times 1,000, then you get a mill rate of $10.21 per thousand. So that is how we went from all of the, just like going through the whole formula and then breaking it down so we can finally get to what happens then with that formula, with our total school levy, and then ultimately a mill rate that's per thousand. And the reason why we like to have a mill rate is because that makes it for easier comparisons among other districts. So any other questions on the kind of school finance 101?
Nope, I don't think so.
All right, we'll keep on moving. So then we're going to look at a little bit at some referendum basics. And I know that your district has already had a referendum, so you may be familiar with it, but it's still just kind of a good thing for a refresher. So there are 3 different types of referendums. There is a debt referendum, which is issued for large capital projects. That's when you're issuing debt. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about the 2 types of operational referendum. So there's a recurring operational referendum, which if you remember the different with the revenue limit formulas and the recurring exemptions, that's where that would go. And then there's a non-recurring. So a recurring operational referendum goes to support operating costs, and the term is unlimited. So what happens is that is added to the base revenue limit, and I'm hoping that you can see on the chart then, so the middle chart, where you can see the green bars, and then you see like a purplish bar that is added on top, and then those gray bars are bigger than going forward, and they stay stable. So in 1 year, there, in this example, there's a recurring operating referendum that is added to the revenue limit, and then that revenue limit becomes that new full gray bar in the future. So, and then it just continues like that into the future. Now, on a non-recurring operating referendum, that's one that has an annual levy and then it sunsets. So, if you think about Wisconsin Heights, there is currently, you have a non-recurring operating referendum, and it is going to be sunsetting at the end of this year. And then, so what happens is you can see here, so before that levy, you had the gray bar, and then in this example, there are 3 years where there was a non-recurring operating referendum, and then that amount then goes away, it sunsets, if you don't renew it. So that is I like it as a visual representation of the difference between recurring and non-recurring. And then some other things to keep in mind. In 2017, the state in the biennial budget limited the amount of times that school boards can make resolutions to have a referendum. And this means for a capital referendum or operating referendum, you get 2 times, you make 2 resolutions. So you can only do that 2 per calendar year. And then also, your referendums can only be held during regularly scheduled election dates unless there's a natural disaster, which of course we would want to have that exception. And I know that you are busy working on this as well, but the resolutions are required to be adopted at least 70 days prior to the election date. So those are some important things to keep in mind as we look at our future election dates here. So we can see in the even numbered years, districts have, there are 4 different election dates. So typically, you have 2 chances to have a question on the ballot. So you could do it in the spring and in the fall. But if you think about that 2-question limit, if there were 2 questions, so sometimes this happens where a district may ask for a capital referendum to issue debt and an operating referendum, and if those 2 questions are already issued on the ballot, you've used up your 2 chances to ask the question, and you would have to wait until the next calendar year. So sometimes when districts are looking at these dates, they're thinking about a few different things. They're thinking about what are the advantages of maybe going in the spring of 2024, and especially if they're just planning on asking like 1 operating question for an operating referendum. I don't like to talk about failure, but I think I always like to have a plan B just in case, right? So if there was not a successful referendum in the spring, in that even number year, then we could go back in the fall. If you were thinking that you were going to wait until April of 2025 and go into spring, and then you would have to wait again for a whole year before you would have another opportunity to go to referendum. And then let's look at, this is probably the most interesting, I would think, part of the presentation, and just kind of looking at, so for Wisconsin Heights, what are we looking at? So on here, I have a table that shows the non-recurring referendum authority, and you can see that in 2019, it was a little bit above 2.2 million. But then from 2020 through 2024, we are looking at that non-recurring, so 5 years, at 2.2 million each year. So again, if you think back to that visual that had the gray lines with the purple line above, so this would be 2.2 million is on top of that gray line for 5 years. And then if we didn't do that on this slide, but if we would project out, right now it would be projected that that would go away because it sunsets for the following year. And this is some mill rate history. So again, when we think about how we got to that mill rate, so we have our revenue limit authority, plus all of those other pieces that may go into the total school district levy, and then you divide that by the total equalized valuation to get your mill rate, and take that times 1,000 to get to your mill rate. So Wisconsin Heights mill rate is $10.21 per thousand, while the state average is $7.18 per thousand. And you can see that historically, even going back to 1984, for the most part, Wisconsin Heights mill rate has been higher than the state average. At times it was higher, a lot higher than where the state average had been, and then other times it was pretty close to the state average. So, you know, it may depend on what was happening with property values, and just kind of looking at the chart, looking at where like 93, 94, and when revenue limits went into place, and how prior to that, you can see that maybe there was a little bit more space between the Wisconsin Heights and the state average. And then it's always nice to kind of look around and see so how do we compare them to other districts? So these are unofficial, but these are the numbers that we have received in for mill rates for some surrounding districts. So you can see Wisconsin Heights is towards the higher end for some of the comparable districts. New Glarus is higher at $10.48 per thousand. And then we have Cambridge at $8.72 per thousand. Marshall is at $8.40 per thousand. And then Belleville and Waterloo are both under 8. So Belleville is at $7.83 per thousand. And Waterloo is at $7.68 per thousand. So that's for 23-24. So for the levies that were just approved by school boards. So then, I had talked about the impact of equalized valuation and how that has an impact on your equalized aid. So again, this is another chart that can help show you how your district compares to the state. So in this example, the blue is Wisconsin Heights, and the green is the state average. And you can see that, so this is looking at your property value per member. And keep in mind that the more property wealthy the district is in the aid formula, that as less aid it will receive. So when we're looking at what had been happening in the past, until probably about, I'm going to say that must have been about 2005, 2006, property value had been lower or about the same as the state average. And then the lines cross, and now you can see that the district has more property value per member than the state average. So the more property wealthy again the district is, the less state aid it will receive. And this has an impact then on your tax levy. And of course, the higher your tax levy is, that impacts your mill rate. So then now we're going to move and look a little bit ahead, and based on the budget forecast model and putting in some, first off, there are assumptions. So Eric and Greg have been working hard on building assumptions and looking at considering what do they expect will happen with revenues going forward for the next several years. What do they think will happen with salaries and fringe benefits and utilities and transportation and all of these different factors that go into that. And so they put that into the budget forecast model. And then we also are looking at estimates right now on equalization aid, and they are definitely estimates. And then we also have to do some estimating on what do we think is going to happen with equalized valuation, and what do we think is going to happen with our membership. Because, it's, you want to try to get something as accurate as possible, but you're never really sure how that is going to play out. So there are some assumptions that were put into place. First off is a very conservative growth for equalized valuation of 2% going forward. The district had increased at a rate greater than that in the past couple of years, but at Baird, we really do feel that that is going to be slowing down. I mean, I can't imagine that it's going to continue at that pace. So, of course, every district has a different, what is conservative, what does it look like? But right now, we have a projection in at 2%. And that's something, obviously, that you as a district, you can adjust that based on what you see in your district.
So, Mary, one of the things that we looked at today was a referendum for $3.2 million, and that projected mill rate, when we plugged that into the model, was 10.53.
Okay. And was that then with the same, everything else, like just this did you change anything with equalization aid?
No,
Okay,
all things equal.
okay. So then, you can see the impact that would be of adding another, $200,000 to this, projection here. So, I thought I had the budget model, your budget model open, but I'm not seeing it on all my screens here. I might have to open it. But we did do, so I want to talk a little bit about the equalization aid. So even though you might have your property value per member might be higher than the state average, the district still does receive state aid. And again, if we're thinking about what happens with our revenue limit authority, as our revenue limit authority goes up, then if our state aid goes up, then that has an impact on the amount of the property tax levy. And then again, we have our whole property tax levy divided by our values to get to our mill rate. So we are right now in this model. Greg and Derek and I have looked at it and we've talked about it, and we have very conservative dollar amount in for what we think will happen with the equalization aid formula. So one of the things that we at Baird like to do, and we try really hard to do, is to get a really early aid estimate. So typically, the state, PI, will give what they call an early aid estimate on July 1. And obviously, you've got things that you want to try to be doing projections for, and you don't want to have to wait until July 1 to be able to project how much aid you might be receiving. So what we do at Baird for our budget forecast model users is we take all of the state data and we calculate that ourselves, and we usually get very close to what that July 1 aid estimate may be. But we have to pull that data. In the past, we would, districts would submit their budget data. We would have that budget data, and we'd have the actual data, because actually we're looking, we would use that to make sure that everything in our formula is still working as what we would expect it to do. So first we reconcile October's aid just to make sure that the formula and everything is still working the way we would expect it. And then we take in all that budget data. Well, school districts have a new way of reporting to the state through what's called WSFIP, and we're still waiting for access to be able to get some better data that we would be able to plug into those formulas just to see, and then that will give us some better ideas of what we can put in for primary and secondary guarantees and ceilings. So we are anxious for that data, and I've been telling Greg and Derek, we've been waiting now for, we've been asking for several weeks, and we keep hoping that we're going to get it, and we don't have it yet, and so we don't have anything calculated. As soon as we do, we'll be sending out to districts to say, hey, we have an update. And so that may change whatever you're looking at for your projected mill rate. So it's kind of like a lot of talking here, just to say it's an estimate and it may change. I expect that it will change as we go forward.
Excuse me, Mary, this is Craig, I'm the interim superintendent.
Yeah.
Do you have at your fingertips what our general state, what percentage our general state aid would have been last year?
I can tell you what you have for this year. Just give me 1 second here.
Derek has
It's roughly 20%, I think.
20%. I just want to add this because I just want people to be real clear on this. I looked at this information last week when Greg sent it to me, and then Greg and I had the discussion today. When you take a look at our mill rate, it is high. And of course you've explained, and I understand this, it's tied into our high equalized aid per member. But I think it's important to note, we are a low spending school district. We spend $11,000 per student. It's the low revenue ceiling. When you say there was an increase of $300 some per member, if you were still below $11,000, you automatically got to go up to $11,000. So when you look at that, I think John Q. Public can say, well, why are you guys spending so much money? It's because we have a very land property wealthy school district with few kids in it. That's where your per pupil membership comes in. So that skyrockets and we get 20% from the state. There are, in Point, we got 56% from the state. It wasn't as wealthy as this particular. So nobody wants to think they're living in this, wealthy area until they try and sell their property. But that really is the issue. We only have 740 kids in our school district with a lot of land wealth. And we're spending a low revenue limit. It's not like we're spending $15,000, $16,000 per kid, and that's gonna jack up our levy and it's gonna jack up our mill rate. That's difficult to explain to people. They just look at, why is our mill rate higher than everybody else? Because we have a higher land value than Belleville and Marshall.
Yes, you do. And that is, that's really nicely summarized. Because Wisconsin Heights is a low spending district, we didn't even go into that when we were talking about the revenue limit, but there are, this year, the state increased what they call the low revenue threshold from $10,000 to $11,000. And in Wisconsin Heights, we're at $10,005.46. So you got to increase up to $11,000 for this year. So that did help with, I'm sure, some of the operational pressure. But again, because you're a small school district with 765 FTE, then it still is a very big challenge on trying to actually balance the budget with ongoing. And again, because you do not receive near as much aid as other districts, because it appears that you're property wealthy. I'm not going to say that in the formula, it shows up that you're property wealthy, because again, you only have 765 members that is being divided into. And as a result, then more of that, the support for the schools falls on the backs of the property taxpayers.
And I think it's important to note that not all districts have debt either. And Wisconsin Heights passed a referendum recently for capital improvement, which added, I think Derek and I just did a quick calculation. I think that's an additional $1.40 on the levy. There are many districts, especially the ones that are really low, that probably are debt-free.
Yeah, exactly. I always like to say that when we were looking at that one chart that had all the comparisons, with the other districts, there's a story to be told in each one of those. And some of those low spending ones may not have any debt right now. So the result, they're kind of, when you're comparing to them, their facilities and everything may look different from what you have in your school district. And
typically, if you're debt-free, your facilities are in poor condition.
Well, I'll refrain from saying anything on that. I didn't, when I introduced myself before, I didn't say to you, give you a little bit of my background. So I was a school business manager in Sheboygan Falls for 16 years, and now I just celebrated my second anniversary on the School Business Solutions team here at Baird. But in Sheboygan Falls, I was very familiar with the impact on debt and comparing that to other school districts around, and also what your facilities look like. But I also know that facilities, school districts try very hard to support their facilities, no matter what their debt situation may be. I'm looking at the breakdown, so of that $10.21 per thousand that you have currently for this year, $8 cents of that, so if we think about those, I'm just gonna go back here. I'm gonna skip back a few slides just for a second. When we get to this one and we think about, so in the purple, or the pinkish purple, that could be $8.13. And then your referendum approved debt for this blue square, this is $2.08. And there's nothing for these other two. So when you add those two together, that's how we get to our $10.21 per thousand. Just so that, so keep in mind that there are different pieces that go into that. So when we're looking at our revenue limit and what happens potentially with projecting, so on these charts we're just doing 3 million. 3.2 million is going to be a little bit different, but it's just only going to change the mill rate. It's not changing any of these other estimates that we have at this point. But one of the things that we talk about is timing. And the district had 5-year non-recurring operational referendum in the past, and now if you're considering a 4-year non-recurring operational referendum, there actually can be some benefit to that. So on this chart, you see that highlighted years, 2027 through 2029, that is a biennial budget year there. And so if you would go out for 4 years for that, in this chart, it's 3 million, but it would be the same thing if it was 3.2 million. Then you can see that it would drop off in the middle of that biennial budget. And some people will say that that could be an advantage because then you can be planning for that next operational referendum that would happen in 28, 29. So the same way that now you're in the middle of the biennial budget this year, and that makes it easier once we know what is happening with our revenue limit, with the $325 per pupil increase. We know how much money has gone into the aid pot. So once, maybe here at Baird, we can get some calculating done, and we can do some tweaking on what we think may happen with the ceilings and guarantees. It could give you a better estimate that way on what's happening with the state. Because those are some things that as a district you can't control. You can look at what's happening with your projections and all of that, but it sure is nice to have kind of an idea of what might be happening at the state level. And so if you would go with a referendum that would go through, say, 28, 29, then we don't know what could happen in that next biennial budget. So that this is an advantage that you have based, looking at if you would go for 4 years.
So is it safe to assume when you look at that 28 there, that we would be going to a referendum in a even year, so then we would have 4 opportunities rather than the 2 if it was an odd numbered year as well?
Yes, so another benefit. Yeah, I was just thinking from like a budgeting kind of perspective and all of that, but yes, for sure. So again, you could look at the spring. And I think, and then also, I was afraid that you were going to ask, so so we just would not go to referendum in 28, 29. It is, I think that most districts in the state are certainly, the majority of districts have to have an operational referendum, and they continue to have operational needs going into the future for a referendum. So that $325 per member on that increase of the revenue limit doesn't eliminate the need that districts see for an operational referendum. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, we got some hands raised here.
Hi Mary, this is Dylan. I'm one of the board members. I'm looking at slide 11 with the purple bars on top of the gray bars.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out the differences in recurring and non-recurring. So let's say back in 2020, we did a recurring referendum for 2.2 million, which would represent that first purple bar, right?
Yeah.
And now we are looking and we need to exceed again. Would that have changed how our question is phrased on the ballot this time around or not?
So you can have, so I think what you are asking there is if we would have had a recurring back in 2020, and now we're projecting and we can see that we have still a need, because you can see that in the recurring example, that revenue limit authority, is just kind of staying stable. That's assuming that everything is staying even. But eventually, expenses could exceed your revenues again, and then you could add on a recurring. It would just be a new question that shall the district go to operating referendum, non-recurring for, in this example, 3 years at this amount each year. So yeah, you can do that. There are districts that do both recurring, and they have that, and then eventually they take whatever they have for a non-recurring, and then they'll have like another recurring exemption, revenue limit exemption. They'll ask those questions.
Dylan, the way I understood that question, you had two questions. The other question's a little bit more complicated. If the district went to a recurring referendum in, what year was that? 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
They went for 2.2 million.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now it was non-recurring, so we dropped down, we have the gap. If it was recurring, and now we're looking at a $3.2 million, the ballot would say whether it's recurring or non-recurring this spring, it would be for $1 million. Because the 2.2 would have been embedded in the base.
That's already, exactly, because that 2.2, if you have a recurring, it just got embedded into your base. So that's why those bars just all turned gray, because they just all permanently became part of those.
So you have to keep going back to the taxpayers every time you need to add to the base.
Right.
So it's somewhat.
Years ago when this started, if you went to a recurring, and this is the pioneers of this budget by referendum, it was very uncommon, but if you did, you were thinking that, well, we'll go to a recurring referendum and we're good for the next 20 years. Well, guess what? Things changed. And those that went to a recurring 5 years later are saying, wow, we didn't realize what was happening down in Madison. Now we have to come back. And now you've got to explain to the public, you just asked us for $2.2 million 5 years ago, now you're coming back for more. The flip to that is, if you go to a non-recurring referendum, I'm quite confident 5 years ago, and I'm quite confident today and 4 years from now, that's not going to be enough money. So you're going to continue to look at, it's a horse apiece. We went to a recurring in point, and I didn't want to because I thought that was going to crush the capital. Because people, they're much more comfortable with non-recurring. Tell us what you need right now, because forever's a long time. You're going to ask for a recurring. What if the state changes the formula and all of the what-ifs?
And I think that, Marion, you can maybe talk to that on the success rate of the recurring versus the non-recurring referendums. I don't even know if you had a slide up there for that, but it's a lot harder to pass a recurring than it is a non-recurring referendum.
Yeah, I don't have a slide up today
Which is fine.
with that, but it is harder to pass that recurring referendum. It's not impossible. And then I would also be very cautious too, to make sure that your community doesn't think that is like the that's the final solution forever, and that the district will never come back. Because when you're looking at, whatever might be happening with your membership, and if your membership is declining, and this got added to your revenue limit, yes, but when you're taking at times that smaller membership FTE, you could still be ending up with less revenue limit authority. So it's not the end all be all. Back when the different. The recurring versus non-recurring was put into place. One of the things that the operational referendum was thought of for the recurring was maybe if you had built a new building and you know you're going to have these permanent costs, like to support that building, utilities and maybe custodial or something, that is something that would be added on that recurring basis. Of course, what has happened with revenue limits and the amount that school districts have been able to, or actually not been able to increase their revenue limits, more and more districts are looking at some type of referendum. Quite often it's the non-recurring thing.
Mary, and I would just add one other thing. I think I can explain this right, but in a district that I was in, we went to a recurring referendum for exactly what you said, because we added some square footage and we wanted to get the custodial costs in there. But what we didn't factor in it was that we were a low spending district. So the first thing that's gonna happen if you're a low spending district in normal times, you're automatically gonna get moved up like we did to the low spending per pupil spending amount. So in a recurring referendum, really those dollars, you have to kind of factor in those dollars first and then go in above and beyond that, because those recurring dollars can get sucked up in the low revenue member increase. So you're not gaining anything, if that makes any sense. Because like Mary said, it goes right into the formula. It's a little bit complicated, but we thought we would see $500,000. We didn't see $500,000 because the low revenue limit increase picked that up.
But if you would have done non-recurring, you would have seen the 500,000?
We would have seen the $500,000. I hope I'm saying that correctly. You get that added to it, and you get the low revenue limit increase.
Yeah, and I think I'll just say from our standpoint in these chairs is, as stewards of some fiscal responsibility, it just perpetuates the conversation, and it's a constant evaluation. And so here we are sitting on the need to go back to the community, but we've had some very thoughtful, intentional conversations on what are our needs, what are the priorities being discussed, how does that ebb and flow with the budget and the asks. And so it kind of, as we can change, as administration can change, as people change, it forces the conversation to be continual and intentional about what are our needs, while also being stewards and not just, throwing blanket numbers out there and saying, well, let's just go 4 million recurring and, and then eventually we'll go, it's a good tool, I think, to constantly be transparent with the taxpayers.
I understand that, and I don't know if I disagree after learning everything, but I think there's certainly something to be said about, in the same vein, having it in the formula, so if there were a time where a referenda did fail, that we aren't looking at a $3.2 million deficit. And, I think that especially when we talk about retention for staff and teachers and the skilled people we have, knowing as an employee that even though my employer depends on every 4 years an election to make sure I can stay around, knowing that, well, at least the next time that election comes around, it's not the sky is falling, if there were to be a failure. Instead, we'd be looking at a $1 million shortfall, maybe. So, in the same kind of vein of that responsibility. And then, I don't know, we're just having this
And
conversation.
we're not alone.
No, I know.
That's,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know what
important that
percentage.
people understand the differences.
Yeah, and I think we all kind of understand going through this process that when we go to exceed by 3 million, 3.2 million in this referenda, well, it's sort of that, but it's, we're going to be taking some of our debt referenda levy limit and shifting it over, so it's not really going to be exceeding by 1 million more, and it's certainly not going to be $3.2 million more in tax. That gets so complicated too. I think there's something to be said of a new recurring of 1 million being much more accurate than saying a non-recurring of 3.2 million. Maybe it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other when you explain it to people, but I think 1 million is closer to what we're actually. But if it does take away, if it gets sucked away because it gets built into.
Well, I'm not, You just need to be careful and you need to be thinking about a lot. And I think our biggest fear is if we look statistically, and a recurring is much harder to pass than a non-recurring, simply because every time you go, you're saying the same message. So you've said this message now at least twice, right? For an operational referendum, it's consistent, people are starting to understand it, and that's really important. So.
Well, and it's, I think, everything you've said about the harsh reality of not being able to predict anything, you're talking about voter fatigue, even in a 4-year cycle, where things can change so drastically that you could be going back to the voters every year or two if something drastic happens and saying, oops, we got that one really wrong. We asked for $1 million last year, but we actually need $1 million more. So there's just, I think, higher risk because you can't predict anything that.
Not to sound like a broken record, but in point again, I didn't want to go to, and I obviously supported it when the decision was made. But the argument, Dylan, is fair, and you're making it. We know that the funds from the referendum is going to go into programming. That's staff. We know in 4 years that's not going to disappear, but the money's going to disappear. So why not do a recurring? There's a good argument to that. Statistically, they are, though, passing, but not as high of a rate as a non-recurring. If you're interested in going to a recurring, and I'm saying this with a half a smile, but there's truth to it, do it in a year you don't have an interim superintendent. We can't afford to fail this. If we fail this, you're going to dip into your fund balance, and you're going to hire a new superintendent that's going to come in this fall or this summer, and they're going to have to go back to referendum next fall. That's a lot to put on anyone's plate.
Mary, do you have any thoughts or watching your body language?
I was, actually, so I'm looking at, the district has been pretty successful with non-recurring referendum questions. Sometimes, because districts will ask us, well, what should we do? Should we do non-recurring or recurring, or how long? And we usually say, what's been successful in your district? And so I can see that the non-recurring has been successful. I think sometimes it was I thought I saw something for like a very specific use. But most of it looks like it's like historically the district's been pretty successful that way. So I think that you have your community is used to it, but yeah, you do worry about voter fatigue. But I think at the same time, that it's like, this is how we are supporting our community school. And we are doing this because the state isn't providing us enough revenue limit authority in order to do that. That's why we have to go to operational referendum. Even if you would go to recurring, you would have to ask, because right now, all of the if we think about on this chart here, all of that purple bar goes away. So you'd have, if you wanted to say that the new question was going to be a recurring question, you don't have that 2.2 million there right now because that it evaporates. So you would have to look at, the 3.2 million if you were looking for another $1 million on top of what you're currently asking for, or what you're currently operating under. Does that make sense? Did I explain that okay?
Yep.
Dylan, you had a second question?
It was about the stability, I think we already covered.
Okay.
Okay. So I got, you were talking, I just want to make sure I understand what you were questioning. You were saying maybe bring that recurring up to like 1 or 2 million and then do a non-recurring for the balance to get it? Is that what you were kind of?
No.
I just was trying to understand how you were asking that question.
Last time we talked about it, we talked about, the impact of 3.2 versus, our 2.21 last year, and it was the 1 million. And I think we were talking about how easy it is to talk about $1 million more than last time,
Yep.
you know? And I think, you know, we can't do it this time, obviously, but thinking 4 years ahead in the next referenda, if we have to ask for even more again, which it looks like we'll likely have to do, I think that election, that referenda will be easier because we would be asking to exceed by maybe 500,000 instead of 3.7.
Okay, I misunderstood how you,
But we
I
could
thought we were
also-
trying to
Marshall
do a
does that,
recurring for a certain amount and then doing
Yeah.
that. That's why I wanted to make sure. I just wanted to understand how you
The
were.
first thing we have to do is backfill what we lost,
Yeah.
Right.
and then add on what we think we're gonna need for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Versus if it's recurring, you stop and you just go to referendum for what you need the next thing. I get what you're saying. I mean,
Right.
mathematically, you're 100% right. There is more stability if you can pass a recurring referendum each and every time. But if you can't,
But
then you got a hole.
if something changes legislatively, like you were saying with your predictions on the per pupil, if that dropped below 100, then we're just gonna have to ask more in
Yeah.
relation to what we're at.
Right.
I mean, so it's gonna, so hard.
But I know if, in that event though, it will maybe have less sticker shock if it were a recurring this time and then next time, you know? But I have a different question now, if I may.
Oh, yeah, go.
So, Mary, thinking about our situation as a district, we feel like for a long time going forward, we're going to need referenda. From Baird's perspective, your perspective, what does this district need to encourage in our community if we want to get to a position where we can be more comparable with other district mill rates?
Ooh, if you wanted to try to get your mill rate down to something that's more comparable with other districts, you'd probably,
Go and buy property.
Well, I think one thing we're doing right now, Mary, is when we defease. I think defeasance is one way to, if you can pay off debt early, and we've done that the last 2 years, you know, that's the first thing that we can do without really impacting student learning, is to get that debt paid off as soon as possible. That would take away, as Mary said this year, what, $2.02 from your levy, which would be, you know, fantastic, and that's gonna pull you closer to the state average. The things after that, I'm just gonna say, aren't very pleasant, because, again, it goes back to what Craig just talked about, and he did, that's the best explanation, you know, I've heard in a long, long time, is that you're property rich and you don't have many students, and you're not the only district that's in that situation. There are many districts, and that's why they've implemented some other measures, which would be the tax credit that they talk about, the individual tax credit that you can get for schools, because they want to get it outside. That's why you see the categorical aid on there. All those different things are there because districts that are property rich don't like the equalized aid formula because they're not getting as much help as Craig said to Stephen's point. But we got to remember what the equalized aid formula is for all Wisconsin kids. But we like to look at it, what we're looking at it, just from our lens, so.
There are districts with zero aid, and they're not wealthy school districts. You go up North Hayward and where Mike Ritchie's from, Northland Pines, zero state aid because they're very property wealthy with all the lakes and the cottages and the beautiful lake homes, but the locals don't live in those homes. They're living in Chicago and Minneapolis. So they have a very high poverty rate, but they don't get any state aid. So it's not a perfect system.
But I think one thing that's important to realize is how important and valuable the pupil membership is in the equations. And so I think one thing to emphasize, especially to the villages and local municipalities, of how important slow and steady progress, development, and changes is that if we suddenly have a drop in our pupils, that's only going to affect things negatively. And so I know a lot of people are against this whole development and growth and change, but without it, it's just gonna make things worse. And so housing, developments are a huge part in this, in our long-term planning.
Slow, well-planned growth that results in slow growth with your student population. More students drops your per member equalized aid, could then result in more state aid, drops your mill rate. But if you add 200 more kids, now you're gonna have to add staffing for that too. So your budget goes up. So the key here is slow, sustainable, so you can plan for it.
So what I'm hearing is you need to have a bunch of babies.
Right.
Well, and,
Slowly, just every couple of years.
we can plan for it.
Every couple of years.
You're young, go ahead.
But really, the district's doing just about everything we can. We need partners, really, if we want to.
Yeah, no, I get it. You're in that, you're in that area right here. You've got just beautiful, beautiful property. And, of course, you take a look at what's the difference between, well, it's Dane County for one thing, but a couple of these other schools are in Dane County. But in Stevens Point, the recreation land is flat. Here it's not. It's beautiful bluffs. And that's just more valuable to people because of the beauty.
But we're also within Dane County.
Correct. Yes.
Is an
And then-
immediate.
Right? Just notice when you drive right across the bridge in Sauk, right across the river, Dane County, it changes right there. And then the property values do this.
Mary, is there anything else you'd like to add to the presentation here?
I don't have anything else at this time, and I would say if you have questions, you can reach out to me or Elise. So Elise just came back. She is actually, I'm just clicking through here, I'm gonna get to this, here. So Elise was on maternity leave this summer, and she had a baby girl, and she just came back last week. And she really is the person who, I believe you've probably even met her before. She said she's presented to Wisconsin Heights in the past. So she's the person who is actually more familiar with your district. But either way, you could reach out to me or Elise if you have questions. And we will keep working and supporting Greg and Derek with the forecast model as they have questions, or as soon as we get some better estimates on the equalized aid. We've been, the three of us have been talking about this for a while, so we're just anxious to get those numbers, because that, even though you aren't heavily aided, it still does have an impact. When you're thinking about future impact and what kind of question you want to ask for an operational referendum. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank
Thanks,
you,
Mary.
Mary. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
So Derek's gonna take us through the updated forecast module.
Are there any questions that everyone's too afraid to ask Mary?
I am gonna question why I have a purple shirt on when the Vikings play tonight.
Oof.
Well, Mary Beth always.
Yeah.
Mary Beth
Oh,
always-
So Derek should be able to roll through this pretty quickly since you've already seen it once, but.
This really is what we went over a couple of weeks ago with maybe a few tweaks.
And really, this is that same kind of scenarios that were in the slides.
You wanna blow it up a little bit. Sure, it's a little rough on the eyes.
Yeah, the light doesn't help either.
Oh, Craig, just to clarify while he's getting it ready, when you talked about we're a low spend district, you're talking about operational spend, which is outside of that debt spending that we do.
It's the $11,000 per student. That's, again, last year, the low revenue was, one was $10,000.
Yeah.
They increased it. The message there is, you have districts that are paying, are we up to 16,000 per student somewhere? I think so.
Some are, I think the highest is right around 19,000.
Okay, so you got districts that are spending 19, okay, Nicolay, Madison, for example, Milwaukee, and we're at 11. We're saying that's not fair.
Yeah.
Well, the state's not gonna go to the wealthy school districts, and the difference goes back to 1993, when revenue limits were enacted. You got a freeze at what you spent. The Thomas Points, the Wisconsin Heights that were frugal were spending low. That's where your freeze was. It was just so unfair. There were districts that, when they started finding out about a revenue limit, a freeze, they increased their spending by millions because they knew that that's where they would have a freeze. And they're not gonna take these $19,000 per student schools and say, we're gonna bring you down to 12. Not gonna do that. So they're trying to take Wisconsin Heights, who's low spending, and move you up. So we are a low spending school district. We spend $11,000 a year. That's what the state's saying should be your minimum. So we're spending the minimum per student.
Well, we were at below.
Right.
Yeah, and when they adjust it again, we're gonna be below again, well, if they do.
Right.
And hopefully they do, because instead of $300 and some per student, we're getting $1,000 per student.
Right.
It could be, because the state's trying to allow us to catch up.
So Greg and I kind of went through and updated the model. The big one is that 3.2 referendum dollar amount, because I believe that's kind of what we settled on coming out of the last workshop. And if we look at kind of the two big, what does that mean our total revenues are, our total expenses, and then what is our surplus or deficit over kind of the 4-year period. So at that $3.2 million, you can kind of see we have surpluses in 3 of the 4 years. A lot of times that 4th year, we kind of, I don't want to say disregard that deficit, but there's a lot of things that can happen in those first 3 years that will help us either kind of reduce costs, like the solar project. We don't know how much utilities that's gonna kind of reduce in this just kind of carrying expenses forward budget. So, and in the first 3 years, we're already kind of building in that cushion to kind of be able to have some room to do stuff with this $3.2 million referendum. So, like we said, that retain and attract high-quality staff to kind of keep the programming, the high-quality education we're providing to resident students in the district to kind of ensure that education level is being met and kind of moving forward at the same type of level. We think we're able to do that with this $3.2 million dollar figure ask of the community. Are there any specific kind of questions or?
I got one right off the bat.
Yep.
So I see you have the surplus on year 1, it's 439, it's on.
Yep.
And then it goes to 274. With the 274, are you using the 439 that was the surplus? It's not accumulating, right? So you're, that 439 that carried over to the next year, we used 200, or roughly 200 of that, correct?
No.
So that's carrying over, so
At the end of the
that's what I was
year-
curious.
at the
That's
end of-
accumulating.
Okay,
At
So
the
that's
end of the
a
year,
1-year kind of silo.
yep,
At 439, at the end of the year, we're positive 439.
yep,
The next silo or year, we're
Yeah.
plus 275.
Okay.
So over the course, it's, yeah.
Or one of the things that we, I would encourage is look at one-time costs. So if you have that surplus of 439, there might be some things that you need to do to your buildings and grounds that you're just not able to do in that third and fourth year of your referendum. Those are great opportunities. That might be technology, it might be, doing some work on your buildings and grounds maintenance that you're not able to look at. So that gives you some real opportunities to do some of those things during those more positive years.
At the end of the year one, if nothing changes, you could put $439,000 into your fund balance or Fund 46. After year two, if nothing changes, you could put an extra $274,000 year.
That's what I was curious, if it's gonna stay, if that's still there, if that portion is coming out of fund balance, then.
No, it's
Okay.
there. So at the end of the day, you're 271 short, but if you add up your year 1, 2, and 3,
We're
and then you deduct your loss of 271, you still have,
That's what I was.
if nothing changes, $545,000
Okay.
in front of you.
And I would also remind you have a very healthy fund balance right now, so you can look at things that you've already done the last couple of years too with those dollars is the fees, get your debt paid off earlier. So there are those opportunities to do things.
In this budget, it also, with the numbers you're looking at, adds a 0.5 student services FTE. That is a grant position. Liz, is it Primo or Primo? Primo, that's been in that position. The grant's up this year. We'd like to retain at a minimum that, so that is added into the budget because we lost those dollars. We started this year with a 0.75 nurse in the budget's a 1.0. We added, whether or not there will be success with it or not, 1 FTE business ed position. And for this model, and it's something that the board's going to have to seriously consider before we approve this, our 4K. 4K all day was purchased through ESSER funds. ESSER funds are gone. We lost that money, so if we want to continue 4K, we have to supplement, we have to come up with that money. Not only that, we only get aided 0.6 on a full-time student. So we're paying a program 0.4 out of our budget. It's coming from some of their numbers, but we have to supplement 4K by 0.4, so other programs in our district are helping to pay for 4K. Not only that, some of these students are coming into our school district for 4K, and then they're gonna go back to their home districts because they're getting a full-time day paid for.
So if you look at that $11,000 per student, you get $11,000 per FTE. So for one student is 1 FTE. So we're only getting in, on the revenue limit, 0.6 of an FTE on that. So you take 0.6 times 11,000, so you're losing just over $4,000, or you're taking away $4,000 from other potential programming to subsidize that 4K program all day, if that makes sense.
It also includes the $1 wage adjustment for support staff for 2 years, so it's $2. So that's what's included in here. And then when we talk about what your surplus is minus your deficit, that we really don't know what it will look like at the end. You're sitting on $545,000 if nothing else changes. Things are going to change. That gives you a limited amount of your flexibility. What could change student enrollment at the end has a lot to do with this. Healthcare, health insurance. You know, we have staff coming and going. The need for health insurance, I mean, my goodness gracious, 4 staff members is $100,000 one way or the other. You could save $100,000 based on needs, and you could add $100,000. This is built on historical data. It's built on what we know now. And it also is built on $3.2 million. And and that goes back to maybe a little bit more conservative thought out of Greg and I and Derek, we don't wanna fail this referendum.
Right, and I think the other thing it goes back to, you can't what if a budget forecast model, because if you what if to the high side, you put yourself out of business. If you what if to the low side, then you don't have enough money for the 4 years. So I think what you're seeing here is an accumulation of the three of us on what we see coming forward for the next 4 years. Is it bulletproof? No, it's not bulletproof, but, you know, I'm feeling as good about this as I have, any other model that I've worked with over the years, so, actually probably a little bit better.
Students moving into our district that may or may not have additional needs. We don't know. We're not in control of all the what ifs.
I'm sorry, did you say that this has the 4K fully funded in this?
It does
one?
not.
It does not?
It does not.
So you'll notice in your content what the verbiage will be written on the ballot. And I think we're not in any position to vote on this yet because we want to make sure we have everything right. And like we talked about last year, even one position, adding one $50,000 position, compounding throughout the 4 years can have a drastic change in impact. And so I think we're being meticulous and methodical, making sure that we have all the necessary conversations now, making sure everything's in the budget. Because again, if you miss one or two things, the surplus changes immediately.
Do we know what it looks like with the 4K program in there?
You would just take go back, you got 68 and 43, so about $111,000 you would take away from each of those years, which would add to your deficit in year 4.
When we talked about 4K coming into the district, we talked about ESSER dollars not being there.
Right.
And that was a really big thing that we understood that in adding in 4K, it was kind of unlikely we were actually going to keep ESSER dollars, so it was something that we had decided we wanted to move forward with all day 4K.
Right, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
What would be helpful, if we're not going to vote on this tonight, is seeing 4K enrollment that is out of our district and how many of those students stay in our district the next year or year after that, so that we can see how many of those out-of-district .6.
How many years is this?
This is our first year.
Second year.
Yeah.
Second year.
Okay.
Can we limit the amount of
No,
open enroll in?
no.
No.
We can't, okay.
So that's the problem, we have no control over that programming.
I-
We can't-
Only second in.
Okay.
That's a question that
You can cap it in January, right?
Yeah,
You can say no.
we-
by grade level, I think.
we can cap open 4K just like we do
Open enrollment.
open enrollment, correct, but not internal.
Yeah, I get that, but that's.
See, one of the issues right now, we are 63 students. We have really high numbers.
Yeah.
And throw in another 3 kids, we'd be coming back and saying we got high enough teacher.
How many of those 63 are outside?
Open enroll.
9.
9 of them.
So that's still not, to me, it's not big.
I mean,
Will-
that's still a
Most
lot
of
of
them
kids.
Yeah, and to me, it's like if we're talking about setting up our district to make it attractive to other families that want to move here, taking away the all-day 4K to me is like a big hit. Like, it would be very drastic.
Yeah, it was a big thing for us to add that in.
Yeah, and the fact that we only have 9 outside students being in 4K, and we have that, I mean,
Right,
that's
out
a
of
pretty big number.
63, 9 out of 63
Yeah,
is
I mean,
really
that's
big.
still a pretty good.
It's
a big
number.
It's a big number
But,
for
yeah.
out of 63. I like the idea that we can cap it, because that prevents us from having to hire another teacher then for it. If
You
we
can
say-
cap
People
it
coming
from,
Right.
From open
from
enrollment.
open enrollment. correct?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, obviously, if we have that many
Coming in.
come in, great, but
Right.
it's the open enrollment.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
open enrollment part of it.
If I may add to, if this is the direction you're going, by including it in this forecast model, doesn't mean you have to have it 4 years from now.
Mhm.
So that's something you can decide based on dollars, and at the end of the day, dollars are gonna dictate what you can and can't do. So sometimes it's just something you may have to do if you get to that point.
Wasn't another category, which I'm not sure you can predict, was kids that live within the district, but then will be open enrolling out elsewhere due to family, I think there were a few, but that's obviously hard to predict when they live in the district. But there was also a few numbers there that won't be, they live in the district, but they will be open enrolling out in kindergarten and on.
So Derek, go back to that scenario, sir, real quick. So if you look at that, did you put it back in there?
Nope. So this would be with 4K back in,
Yeah.
what the scenario looks like.
And if, year 3, that's really nothing to worry about there. You make that work. Year 4, again, worst case scenario is you go into year 4 and you make decisions on what you're gonna do on your next referendum, and you take that deficit out of your fund balance. So, I just don't want you to get hung up on year 4 and the numbers. I mean, it's a big number, don't get me wrong. History shows usually that number goes down, it doesn't push up. That doesn't mean it will be that way, but you do have a fund balance and you do have some savings in these other years to help offset that a little bit.
And we will know by that 4th year what the actual levy increase number will be from the biennial budget. Right?
Not before that.
Well, you got another one coming yet here in 2 years.
Oh, and that's,
Yeah, and then you'll have another one.
Right, so 25, 26, and 26, 27 will be the next kind of biennial budget, and then 27, 28 will be the first year of a new one.
but I mean when we're planning for the next referendum.
Greg and I talked today about the 4K issue, whether we should, how do we put that in here? And I said, well, just leave it, it doesn't, we're being transparent here, it's not our decision whether or not you have 4K or not, that's your decision. But we'll have that's gotta be decided next, at our next meeting before we finalize this, whether or not we're gonna have that in there or not. And then you can then discuss pros and cons, and I know part of it was looking at a way to grow your district and be attractive. But that said, right now, you're paying about $110,000 out of your other programs to make that happen.
So the other thing I want to point out on this model, this is a $3.2 million referendum. If you want to go lower than $3.2 million, you can add 200,000, or take away 200,000 from year 1, 2, and 3, and then add another negative 200,000 to the last year. So there's some consequences if you want to do what you're doing, and that's where I say dollars will eventually determine what you can and can't do. So if you're gonna go to a $3 million referendum, that really changes how you're gonna view probably 4K and everything else you want to do. It's gonna start really kind of tying your hands behind your back on what you want to do. Any other questions for Derek on that? So the next thing, just to keep moving here, is you're going to have to decide either at the December board meeting on the 11th or the first board meeting in January on your ballot question and your resolution. You should have copies of that here. I would highly, if you're going to pass it on the 11th, you have to be okay with it now because Quarles and Brady will draw up some papers, and that's what you have to publish, and that's what you have to pass. Okay, so highly encourage you to look at that. Otherwise, you have this next opportunity on the 11th to say, okay, this is what we want to do, and then come back in January to approve that. So I don't know, Barb and Craig, what you want to see or see.
Well, I think the question is, it is what it is. It's just what number are we gonna put in there? But if we're going to approve it, we want that number on the agenda. And I'm not sure anything's changed, and if it is, this is the time, let's talk about it. It's gonna say $3.2 million.
The only thing I brought up that is of some concern, I think, is staffing, and we talk about burnout, and we talk about a lot of things in that realm, and specifically within our spec ed department. I've had some conversations with Craig, if we can find some data about some trends and, the loads and staffing and, kind of what that realm is looking like. And, you know, I feel like that would be good to know, especially knowing how one person can affect, a model. And now is the time to kind of address
Right.
kind of some of those needs.
I had a brief conversation with Kelly this afternoon, and it's important to get the data in front of us in terms of, from the large picture, you know, what percentage of our student body is identified special education over the last, 5 years. You know, where are we trending? We know that we're increasing, but to what extent, I'm not sure. That said, we're at a caseload, and caseloads are a little bit challenging when you just throw a number, because you don't necessarily know what is in a specific IEP and what specific needs are. But our caseloads range from 8 to 13, and quite frankly, that's not high. Those are good caseloads. We also know that we likely will need to increase staff over the course of this referendum, potentially another EA and another staff member. Therein lies partially that flexibility that 3.25 gets you in terms of having to add a position or two, but you can't add a position or two in 3 or 4 different areas.
But also, in the newest model with 4K in there, which actually between the surplus and deficit is more like a balanced budget, there isn't that flexibility.
Correct, it's good, you're correct.
So,
Correct.
those are the
Well,
tough.
if you pull that back up, Derek, because Derek's got 4K into it, and again, it's really year 4 that you're worried about. You still have flexibility in year 1 and 2. Year 3, if you added another staff member, you know, I think I'm estimating that, and Derek may differ, but I doubt it, about $68,000 for an additional staff member, and that's a professional staff member. So that pushes that again up to about 100. And if that was your greatest deficit in those 2 years, again, you get to regroup in 27, 28. And the only reason I'm saying that, you can, again, you're the decision makers here, is we want to ensure a successful referendum for you, to do as much as we can. So that's why I guess I'm saying.
No, I get it. You tend to be more glass half empty with community support, I think, which.
No,
with your
they,
history-
business
I get it.
managers
I know.
always are in glass half
I
empty.
know, I get it. But the notion of being on the fence about going to the public with such a small differential, knowing what the greatest impact that extra 100,000 could have on our programming and the staff, and that's the complete picture that we really have to talk, and I get it.
Absolutely.
Because you're talking every point, everything makes a big deal, but at the expense and cost of what wouldn't happen in the school and for our kids is really where the tough conversations have to come into, so.
So having said that, so you got the 11th and that first meeting in January to make the decision. I think there's a lot up in the air yet, you know, I don't want to rush, but if you tell us what you want from our bond council, because they have to have the documents in place and the notifications and the resolutions have to be published.
Well, we will definitely, by the 8th, have our number. And I know a lot is happening between now and the 8th, but we've also talked about the need of if we have to have a special meeting in December, off schedule with our interviews and stuff, we will have that to make sure we have the conversations and everybody feels good about the number.
Our next Monday night meeting is on the 11th, the 8th is the presentation.
Correct, on the
Okay.
slate,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
But December 25th is technically, Christmas is our second, so whether we
Yeah.
need to have a
Oh,
special
yeah,
meeting
yeah.
in between the 11th and the 8th, to talk about some of the stuff, we might have to do that. but-
We'll meet as often as you, this is a
Yeah.
big deal.
Big deal.
It's imperative we have 7 board members agree on this.
So does that mean we're looking to find different ways that 3.2 is going to end up being in the next
Well, I think
meetings?
in between now and the next meeting, we still have some data to acquire and some conversations, maybe, and some other stuff to present. And we'll have this probably conversation again, is to say, maybe if we need to regroup at what.
I guess at the end of the day, it's this. If we regroup on, well, we're gonna have another meeting on December 8th. We won't be meeting as a unit. Whether or not it's a thought that we'd like to have more flexibility within the model, it's simply adding numbers in there that would give you more flexibility, whether it be to increase staff over the next 4 years or compensation over the next 4 years. We're not gonna have an opportunity to talk about that. It's whether or not, if you're interested in going over 3.2, we can put in 3.2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, and Derek can just show you right now what that does, because we don't know what our needs will be over the next couple of years. True, I'm looking at, what did I say? In terms of $545,000 of flexibility, that is with 4K in there.
That is.
Pull that out.
That's
Without, excuse me.
Without.
And that was, what'd you say, about
There's no
$110,000.
So one of the things, I guess, that I look at is, if we just go with the 3.2, it puts us where you've got the numbers now. I guess I look at our very healthy fund balance. If something actually does change and we need to add a position, it's not like we have to cut it from another position at this time. And that's something that in 4 years, we can reevaluate again, but we've got the money there. Why cut out a program that is very healthy, like a 4K or something else, and who knows, whatever it is. But, you know, I don't know if we need to go any higher. I don't think we want to go any less, you know, but I don't know. It's kind of
You do have a healthy fund balance. There's an unwritten rule that you need to be very cautious about taking positions out of fund balance because they're forever.
right.
And
But if it gets
But
us just
to
to
the next referendum.
referendum, then it's only a year or
Sure.
whatever that happens to be.
And then we've baked in expectations of that referendum, including 4K already, which this time around is kind of a new thing, right?
Mhm.
What if we did 3.25 million? And that would add us a little bit more flexibility over the 4 years.
Again, I think it's
I think
those
it's kind of
numbers,
a-
and we can put
Yeah.
any number,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5. But I think it goes to, where are we at right now? What is it looking right now? We can only project so much. But that's where we do have that fund balance available to us. Like we said, we don't know what our solar is gonna do for us. So I think there's still a lot of things for our next 4 years' future that we have that could still change some of those numbers that we just don't know. And next time we'll also know about the budget, you know, we'll have a much better idea of that too, so.
But I also think notably because you three won't be here,
Yeah.
that, and this can change.
I was gonna
And so it's.
just go there. What's the next?
It's a lot
People
more
come and go.
predictable and formal and consistent when it's put into a budget. And saying, this is our expectation that the budget includes this. If it doesn't, and any of us change, well, if it's not in the budget, I'm not pulling it out of the fund balance, because you should have thought of that and put it in the budget.
There's just so many different things.
So,
And it's really hard because for me, I'm concentrating on the first 2 years. The last 2 years, I'm like, you know, with the 4K in there, yes, we have negative 2 years. But the next 2 years to me is I'm concentrating more on that than I am the year 3 and 4. Just because with you know, 1 and 2 years, it is kind of easier to almost predict what's gonna happen. And I do agree that having it in the budget already, it's already set in there. But again, we're not talking about $1 million that we're gonna be in a deficit by year 4. I don't know. It's just
but remember the last time we were talking that even one full-time FTE is not 50, 50, 50. It's
Right.
50, 100,
Yep.
150. And so you talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars in just two positions with benefits, and
Right.
you could be looking at $1 million.
And, you know, the whole thing about, you know, like, we're trying to figure out, you know, what's gonna happen with spec ed. To me, that is the most unknown piece of the entire budget. Like, to me, that is just the most unknown piece, because to me, that is the absolute hardest part of our education right now, is making sure that all of our spec ed students are taken care of, get the proper teaching and all that stuff. So for me, that is like the hardest part, to even figure out what that even looks like 6 months from now.
And we are historically high.
Exactly, so it's like, it's easy, and I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's easy for me to say, oh, 4K, pff, perfect, throw it in there. Spec ed is such another thing, because if we overcompensate for what we might need, if we undercompensate for what we might need, it's like, I don't think there's really a middle ground.
Which do you think is better for kids at the end of the day, though?
4K, it's the same way with 4K though, too, because if you're
No,
gonna
I'm
talk
saying
about.
having something built into the
Right,
budget or not.
right. But what do you do, how do you determine that for spec ed though? Like, what numbers do you use? Like, it's so hard to figure out, like,
So we've had some
You know.
conversations, and I'm sure he shared is, conceptually, I get it, it's
Yeah.
a very hard thing.
It
And
is.
Before we've, I know previously when Jordan was here, you hear those blanket, well, Madison, the caseloads are 20, so you should be happy with 30, but that's not
no, it's not.
an equalized representation of what the needs are, whether it's an 8, a 13, a 10. And so I get that, it's really hard to
It is.
know, and so I think.
We don't want to make this an issue of regular and special ed.
No, I'm just
The issue
kind
here
of.
is the state of Wisconsin is
Right.
not, they have not met their commitment
Oh, of course not.
to two-thirds funding, and that goes back decades right now. And we do know that special education does have a higher cost than regular ed. And we're going to do the best we can with all of our kids that walk in the door, and there's variables that are out of our control, we just don't know.
Right.
I think the issue that it still goes back to is what comfort level do you have in terms of what you want to ask to go to referendum? And you know the community, I mean, I don't. I'm used to the conversation going the other way. It's a board saying, we aren't going to do that, we're gonna go $500,000 less, make it work. But at the end of the day, you're short money too, I can tell you that. And the issue of a fat fund balance, I shouldn't say that, but you guys have a fund balance
It's not
that is,
politically correct.
sorry. You guys have a very large fund balance. I mean, which is a good thing, because you might get in those situations where you got your back against the wall. But taking,
And to add to that too, is, like I said, it's, what also makes that really hard is that we have such amazing people that handle our students and teach them and, you know, help them grow, and it's just, it's so hard to be like, okay, like, you know, when you're talking about, well, should we add for another position, should we, you know, so it's like, oh, it's just, it's so difficult.
And I think that's one of the challenges, yes, we can put it in the budget,
Yeah.
but next year, we are gonna have new people on the board, you know, who
Right.
knows, or we're gonna have new staff, we're gonna have a new superintendent. It's always, it's
Yeah, the
it's an
conversation could
ongoing
be-
thing.
The conversation could be totally different.
Right, so we could put it in the budget, but they might not be like, well, no, I don't want that person,
Yeah,
it's
it's
this, you know, so I think.
I think I just keep going back to, we heard it at our future search, we've heard it continuously on the surveys now, that the number one thing is hiring and retaining high-quality staff. And so, and that is the most important but most expensive line item in a budget. And so that's gonna be continuing to be the conversation always, is, are we doing enough to fulfill the needs of our staff currently, and are we, you know, prioritizing retention and hiring, and also noting that that's the most expensive thing in a budget. And yes, it's a give and take, but I guess at the end of the day, I'm gonna sway towards being a little bit more conservative, that we're
Right.
taking care of our kids And just because it's in the budget, you're right, we don't, if we don't need it, we don't need it. But conversely, if it's not in the budget and somebody decides, you know, put it in the budget, I don't want it, that's more detrimental, but.
So are you comfortable with then you're talking about like staff retention, are you comfortable with like the increases over the next 4 years? You know, cause
Like
I'm just,
percentage-wise?
yeah, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are with that as well.
I think we built in a conservative number to make, you know, make
Right.
those, ebb and flows.
Can I hop in?
Yeah,
So I was at the workshop, I was at Whitewater, there was probably 50 people from southeast Wisconsin, Madison, southeast Wisconsin. They did a survey of what are your assumptions for salary increases next year. It ranged between 4 and 5%, the majority at 4. And then moving forward, it ranged from 1.5 to 3.5, with kind of 2.5 to 3 being right in line with, so it was like right in line with what we had built in. Everybody's assuming inflation and CPI is coming down, and it's gonna normalize again back to historical trends. So that's what, and I'm saying there was very experienced business managers and people who track this way more than I do, or Greg does, or Craig does, in that arena and realm, taking that survey. So
And
I
this-
felt good with those assumptions.
Sorry, just to clarify, this one that we were seeing is a 4% and then 3%?
Yep.
Okay,
Good to know.
and also noting that, regular conversations will happen about market comparisons and, you know, making sure people are within the percentile that they should be. That's a more regular conversation than just
Then
a
just like once a year or
presumed
once a year.
salary schedule. Yeah.
So Barbara, you thinking you wanna go to 325, is that what you're?
I felt like we maybe need to talk about, again, making just sure that we have all of the positions necessary. And that there's full transparency in saying, hey, yeah, this is an area we need to add one or plus one, and that's okay. And if it's not, then that's okay. But that's why tonight I don't feel like comfortable that we can necessarily vote final.
Oh, no,
that-
no.
You know what I mean?
We still have some time. We have next month, and then we have January. And we can throw in a special meeting if we need to. But that January meeting is really the timeline. So if something's gonna be added, it probably want to be attached to maybe a meeting in December.
Yeah, and I just think too, it not only the monetary side of things, but also putting something in the budget like that speaks to priorities, and it speaks to kids, staff, parents, that is something that could be a priority, while adding a staff member here could be important. I mean, that speaks more than the financial side of things too, so that might be important to some people.
So Mike, what is your thought? 'Cause I know the last time we were talking about going anything over 3.2.
I am comfortable at 3.2. I don't know what going over that personally right now, just my gut feeling. You just don't know. You really don't. And I get your point with, you know, if we present it, but my fear is the community is not gonna get that message, and they're gonna look at the number. The number is what the community's gonna look at.
Yeah, they don't care what's in the budget.
They
just-
don't, they really don't. I can't imagine even, I would be surprised if 5% of the people look at
Parents.
the budget.
Parents
Might.
tend to, but there's a lot of voters out there
I don't think there's even
that
a lot of
don't,
parents that.
that don't have kids in the school district.
I never looked at the budget up until I was sitting here. It just never crossed my mind to, because it was like, you guys are taking care of it, take care of it.
You know what you need
You
to
know.
put it on.
Yeah.
If that is true, which, you know, yeah, right, then I also think that those same people don't remember what we said last time.
Oh, I agree, they're not.
So
gonna-
then it's like, well, what's 3.2 to 3.3? You know, because I know for us, we know we're asking to exceed by another $1 million than we did last time. But to the people who see the 3.2 number, know that or remember that. Maybe.
Oh, I think they.
Well, obviously,
they
you'll
know the
have
number.
those
I
that
think they
will
know the
always
number.
have their opinions about the budget. They will obviously remember, as we've talked about
And we
those
won't get them
people
this
all the
time.
time.
You know, and we won't get those folks this time, sad to say, but, I mean, there are some folks who are no already before we go to referendum and decide.
Regardless.
That was just my
Yeah,
gut.
regardless of
I'm
what you
not saying
ask.
that I'm
$50
against
or
going higher.
$1
I-
million.
What about you, Matt? You've been pretty quiet over there.
When you said, what you said about the 3.2, with the not wanting to cut into the fund balance as a firewall, but having a healthy fund balance if we have to go through the firewall for the last couple of years or however, whenever we might hit that. I mean, I feel like 4K, especially if we have a way of trying to make that such that it's predominantly our district dwellers that are using that, I think that's a gigantic thing for the students. I think it's a gigantic draw for people looking at a district to move here. So I really want to protect 4K at all costs. I guess I'm for 3.2 and staying there. I mean, I could be kind of tickered a little bit one way or the other, but not a lot. And I guess I value, just philosophically, when we're talking about recurring versus non-recurring, I think this is how I practice in my medical practice. I pick what I'm gonna do on Monday with my inpatient patient, make the adjustments I need to make, see how they look on Tuesday morning, make more adjustments, and I'm a day-to-day tinkerer, so I get it the way I like it, and I don't like the dial it in and walk away and kind of mentality. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm probably a non-recurring, do our due diligence, like even if we have to make hard sells to people every so many years, I feel like that's part of the purpose of what we're here for, just philosophically. But if we were to vote right now, I'd say 3.2, and that's, I guess, based on what these guys have done, what they've shown me. There's some risk to, you know, fluctuations. I think we are a nimble board and we adjust to the times, and that's, I think, one of our strengths to support.
And I think we can only really make decisions on, you know, with us collectively, who we are right now. You know, yeah, we don't know what next year looks like, what the following year looks like, but, you know, collectively, we can all make decisions that we feel is best for the district, right? You know, that's pretty much what we can do at this point. And we all agree that, you know, there are areas that we really need to focus on, and we're all in agreement with those. But yeah, the scary part is that this can totally look different in 2 years.
Have there been conversations within the 4K realm of capping and like what, again, this is something you can't project, but you know, keeping the 3 teachers and not going to 4, or even with a capped enrollment, conceivably, is there a possibility to have to go to 4?
4 sections?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, full day 4K, we're gonna have high numbers in
Right.
here. It's just,
And so 3 sections is built into the budget, not 4.
Right.
So that's another
And
position.
space-wise too, there's no extra classrooms.
Yeah.
The 2 rooms with daycare, there's not extra space. And I need to speak up, there's more to 4K, having full day, because it impacts the entire building. All K-5 kids get less art, music, Phi-Ed, each day. Lunch recess supervision, we really should add staff for the supervision. When we had our 2 schools, we had our 2 EAs that were, so that could actually supervise lunch recess K-5 with full day. They're not available. On top of that, our 2 library EAs were available at lunch recess. We kind of absorbed 4 recess supervisions within the staff, so special ed has carried the load there. Lunchtime has become very difficult to get all the kids covered. We just don't have the people. And every teacher lost 10 minutes of prep every day with full day 4K, which has not necessarily gone over well. There's some positives, there's, you know, we could make pros and cons list. You know, it's great for families, you know, particularly our district residents. It's also been a great asset for our teachers' kids that don't live in the district. We've picked up some teacher kids that are here for 1 year, they're gonna probably go back to their home district, but that's been a nice perk for our staff. But my worry is the consistent high numbers, that more than likely will happen with full day 4K. And where do you draw the line? So 2021, we had another 4K today. Just added another one, so.
And I think that's the hard part is because it's not mandated, you can have people change their minds all the time. And so you can't even conceivably predict
Correct.
or project because people can, on a whim, say, yeah, I want to get my kid in.
I think we have 5 students right now that are actually coming to halftime still.
Is the lunch recess the toughest part of the staffing for 4K all day? Or one of the toughest?
It's one of them, the loss of prep time and the added, we added 63 kids to all the special teachers. Just here's 63 more kids to your schedule.
So the reason I ask is when I was, I do remember when I was in grade school, and we always had to have a parent came to supervise recess, volunteer parents. And they loved it. Parents loved it because they got to sit there with their kids playing in the recess.
Yeah.
But I mean, is it something we can look at, if there's a volunteer list, sign up, it helps out at least?
We have 3 or 4 parents that are pretty consistent right now that come in and help in the lunchroom. They help wait tables. And do help with some of the, they're not necessarily supervising, but there's another adult that's in the room. Yeah, and I would say recess is probably very different than when you were at recess.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
No cheater coming.
No wooden swings.
So my question is, what would be a healthy number of 4K students if we put a cap on it? What would be a healthy number?
Per classroom?
Yes.
In utopian world, I would say 17 max. Ideally, you want about 50.
So I mean, what are our thoughts on something like that if we want to keep the program? But we
Well,
don't
we can't
want to
cap,
exceed it.
and we can only cap what enrolled in, is all we can cap, we can't cap.
Yeah, that's right, dang it.
So I think I would feel comfortable because I think right now we're talking about programming and staffing, and I would like to take the time to gather some more data and to have a good thorough conversation, because I know a lot from our end, while we seem well-intended and we think we're missing out on the day-to-day and exactly what the needs are. And so I think we need to have a little bit more data and a little bit more thoughtful conversation about these high-price ticket items, the pros and cons, what are the expenses, before we just up and vote, if you feel okay with them.
It's better right now, staffing, end of the school day. It takes 4 adults for each homeroom just to get the kids where they need to go.
Yeah.
We have our busers, we have our kids that are getting picked up by parents. We have a group that's going to after-school daycare, and then we have a group that's going to the our after-school program waiting for the older siblings. So it takes 4 different adults to get in each homeroom. So I got people coming in, a lot of the special teachers will actually come just to help distribute kids at the end of the day.
I have to say though, I think it's a good problem to have, frankly. The fact that we do have these programs that we have for our students, before school, after school, daycare, all day 4K. I mean, to me, it really is a good problem to have, just because there are a lot of districts that can't offer programs like that. So, it is a good problem, but yet it's a tough problem because, again, then, as we're doing right now, we're dealing with the money part of it.
Well, but also, I mean, at the expense of
Right.
toll on staffing,
Exactly.
other programming,
Exactly.
there's a lot of other things that.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Austin, I don't know if he's able to get the kids outside. I think pretty much by class is always indoors because there's just not enough time. So it's about 25-minute class periods.
And you're saying, and something in there too is how that impacts K-5 with the specials too, I think would be something pertinent to put in there, of how the
It
schedule.
really impacts them
Yeah.
because it shortens their time with their other kids.
Right.
Plus, it's 3 more homerooms that we got to teach.
I don't even know what you would do to add another class, though. If you said we don't even have a room for them,
You figure it out.
Yes.
You always do.
add on to the school again?
Shuffle.
No.
You move. move somebody and just get it figured out.
All right, so that will be ongoing. Anything else to add?
Can I just point one other thing, Derek, if you could open it up? And
We gave Greg too much time to think about something.
Oh, I actually talked, I'm kidding. Pull up that document on, when it talks, and it's just for your review. If, I wanted to know if you got it, it's about referendum and what the do's and don'ts for the school board and the employees, so. It's a separate sheet. We'll send it out again, don't even worry about pulling it up. But that's one sheet I would highly encourage you to look at and review.
Awesome, well, thank you
Yes.
for your work, you continue to work on that. We're making progress.
Yes.
We promise we'll meet the deadline and put the ducks in a row.
Well, I just, part of me is, some of this stuff, wish we could have done 6 months ago or 4 or 3 months ago,
Yeah.
so.
You guys have done a tremendous job for the time and everything you've been given and lack thereof.
It's hard to put you in this position.
No, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
We'll make it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a good segue into spending a lot of time together in the month of December. So we will have, now it says Monday, December 8th, and it's Friday on our future meeting minutes, and that's when Mike Ritchie will be meeting with us, talking about our slate. And our interview sessions coming up, and then following our regular scheduled board meeting of the 11th. So just note, Friday's meeting is at 5:30. Monday's scheduled meeting again at 6, and then our interview days, Tuesday, Wednesday are at 5 p.m. The interviews will start. Yeah, so make sure to jot those down. Any questions about anything coming up beside that? All right, then I will take a roll call into executive session pursuant Wisconsin statutes 118.125, parent C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Cindy Biting. Mary Beth Shaw. Barb Stotts.
Here.
Mike Wagner. Matt Crowe. Dylan Allenstein. I'm here as well.
Awesome.